So welcome to the Inconvenient Minority Podcast. I'm your host, Kenny Hsu. Joining me today is Anna Paulina Luna. She is a congressional candidate, former GOP nominee for representative of Florida. And she's, from a low-income Hispanic neighborhood, but was able to rise out of her circumstances, become a U.S. veteran, really serve our country and impact our country and our values today. Anna, it's so great for you to join us today.
Thank you so much for having me on, Kenny.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Anna, I've been hearing about your story and, the remarkable rise and that's been going on. But why don't you tell the audience a little bit about, where you were raised and how you were raised in terms of your values, your background, and your identity?
So basically, I was raised from, I guess, and it's kind of weird because even as an adult, I don't look at it really from a victim mentality, but apparently
sure.
My upbringing is not normal. So I was raised by a very young single mother. My mom ended up choosing life over abortion and had me at a very young age. My father was not really in the picture. He was, unfortunately, and up until maybe about 7 or 8 years ago, struggled with a drug addiction, a pretty severe one at that. So he really wasn't in the picture. And by the time I had graduated from high school, I actually went to 6 high schools. So I had moved around a little bit, growing up obviously in Los Angeles. And then with that background, you really do start at I think, a different bracket of status, right? So I knew I'd always wanted to go to school. I didn't even know how to apply to colleges, and I had no idea about how I would even pay for it. So I ultimately overheard actually at a house party that the military would pay for your schooling. And so I went and talked to a recruiter. I had no idea what I was getting into, and I essentially enlisted. And it was honestly the best thing that I could have ever done for myself.
And tell me why, because I think a lot of people, they have obviously the view of veterans in the Army in the United States is still very positive. But in terms of the process, not everybody is willing to commit, you're not willing to make the trade-off between, okay, I get paid for college, but then I have to go serve for X number of years in the U.S. Army or the U.S. Air Force and that kind of thing. Tell me about why you think that it was worth it for you.
For me, I always remembered hearing my mom talk about student loans, and I didn't want to take out any loans. And for me, just the toss up of, having to wait a little bit longer to graduate, but not have the student loan debt, and then ultimately being set up for life, especially being that there's so many benefits that come along with that. It was a no-brainer for me. In fact, I remember I sat down, and I think for a lot of people, if they sit down and they write, a benefit or a positive versus negative list on like how to make a decision, that's ultimately really what swayed my decision. And I think that a lot of people too, though, are lazy. I know it sounds weird, like, okay, you have to go to school and like you're going to be in the military, but honestly, it was great. And I just remember, it wasn't like I ever had to worry about money being in the military. I had my housing paid for, I had food, I had a job, I had medical. I was completely taken care of, and I was able to go to school still even full time, and ultimately had my degree paid for by the GI Bill. And so I actually graduated from college without debt.
Yeah. So let's talk about upward social mobility then, because you were, raised in a low income neighborhood in California. And a lot of people from low income circumstances, or there is this narrative, I think, especially among, you would call it like the elite left, that social mobility in America has been devastated by a number of things, by automation, by the over reliance of elite selective colleges, by all of these policies that that supposedly cut back on schools and those kinds of things. What do you think about social mobility in this country today?
I think that if you put in the effort and you're willing to work hard, that it's possible. And actually, my argument for that is that a lot of these policies that these people, put forward in the name of social justice, a lot of times they're written from people that haven't had experiences like myself. They don't know what it's like to have a parent in and out of the prison system. They don't know what it's like to have, one parent that never graduated from college. They're written from such a quote unquote woke perspective that they don't have any of the life experience. And so you take someone like myself, who has essentially, worked my way up to a position now where, it's kind of weird because I think about my upbringing and then I look at even now interacting in the political arena. And, I do find it that on a regular basis, I'm interacting with many people who are independently wealthy and just haven't had the experiences that I have. And yet I agree with them more on policy because they understand that government can never help you as much as you can help yourself. And so that's how I kind of connect ideas. And even talking on the topics of, college and how college is now forcing certain people to be accepted and discriminating against others. I mean, you take the Asian American demographic and what happened at Harvard. The fact that if you are a male Asian, that they're not as likely to take you as if you're a Hispanic female. And I think that, admissions for college should be based on qualifications, not on the fact that you were born to Asian or Hispanic parents.
Yeah, that's obviously that's been a theme of of the podcast in my upcoming book,
Oh, really?
Inconvenient Minority.
Yeah.
It's just it's great that you've studied up on this issue and that you've thought about it though, because it is interesting thinking about this racial identity that has been invented really from the 50s. This idea of the Latina or Latino American. I mean, now it's Latinx or whatever.
No, Latina.
I mean, the idea, it was created, by people on the left to position, people who look vaguely, like they're from a Spanish speaking country, as a victim category, as a victim category. And it puts people from very different backgrounds and perspectives, from first generation Mexican Americans to, third generation Americans that have come from all sorts of places who don't at all culturally feel Latina at all, but culturally have assimilated into the American consciousness clearly. I mean, what do you think about this idea of a cohesive Latino or Latinx identity?
I think that's when you think about the way that people present themselves, and I'll give you an example here. So like, obviously I'm a second generation American. Both of my parents are half Hispanic and then half either Native American or white. So I'm pretty much as multicultural as it gets. And yet, I'm fair skinned. So like, I grew up with my father, who's a lighter skinned Hispanic man, mixed race. And I grew up with him speaking Spanish in the household fluently. I grew up with him basically instead of like going to the ice cream man, we would have the lote guy, which is street corn. And they would go around. I'm pretty sure the guy that would sell the corn was illegal because he would literally steal like the Pick and Save shopping carts and go around with the horn and like spoke no English and would only take cash. So, I mean, that was my cultural experience, right? Yet, because I'm a conservative, because I'm a Republican, I will never be as Hispanic enough as the left or that the Democrat Party would like to box me in stereotype-wise. And one of the most horrifying and offensive questions I ever got from a liberal reporter was from a liberal white reporter who told me, talk to me about your Hispanic identity because you're white. And I looked at him, I said, I'm sorry, did you just literally one, comment on my skin tone and then box me into an identity? And then also two, was Obama not black enough for you because he was part white, and are you white shaming me? So like, I don't think he ever expected that response, but I think that a lot of people, when they are presented with that, it's like, they're so afraid of speaking the truth because they don't want to be dogged or dragged, and they don't want the repercussions of what people might say if they disagree with them. I say disagree with them, especially if you're a minority, because either way, we're never going to be enough if we don't adhere to their standards. So what are we really losing? Nothing.
Exactly. Because I mean, you see it the way it's coming with Asian Americans too, right? Because, we're supposed to be so-called people of color, right? I mean, Biden just signed this order saying, we want to eliminate xenophobia against Asian Americans for supposed anti-Asian racism due to the coronavirus. So supposedly we're a victimized category, victims of racism and those kinds of things. But I guess when looking at the education system, we're lumped in with whites. And in fact, it's even worse for us.
I mean, and my question for that is Biden then going to overturn the discrimination that occurs in college admissions? And then aside from that, if you really want to look at why the Asian demographic is successful, especially in career, economically, and educationally, it's because most Asian communities have a strong emphasis on family values and the family unit. In fact, my father is now, and his long-term fiance is Vietnamese, and they're like one of the most conservative demographics. So it's
Yeah,
kind of
they are.
funny. Yeah, it's like super funny. I hear people talk about, Asian values. Well, we're discriminating against Asians in our education system because of liberal policies.
Oh, exactly. I mean, it's yeah. I mean, exactly. It's you penalize the people who practice the educational fruits that will lead to the places where they become academically excellent, right? And everybody chooses their own path. Not everybody's going to choose the path of academic excellence, but in the sense that if Asian Americans disproportionately do, then that is something to be cherished, and because academic excellence is great and it's a great thing for this country, but instead it's being penalized because you're part of a racial group.
Exactly. And if you really wanted to change the admissions status quo, really, I mean, stop just focusing on GPA and instead focus on the whole person concept, which was a crazy thought that I had during the medical school application process, is that you get all these people that are basically academic savants but have no people skills. So I mean, isn't that the admissions flaw in their own interview process? I mean, why is it the student's fault?
I wanted to present this idea to you and get some of your thoughts on it. Especially you, I think you're the right person to speak on it because you are coming from the background that you come from, low income, but was able to join the Army and achieve, a level of upward social mobility. Would you describe the military as an effective institution for low income's upward social mobility, in the sense that it's able to propel people, off from damaged cultures or from cultural upbringings that are low income, and propel them to, adopt the kind of values that can help them succeed in this country?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I found that although the military is from, a socially and economically diverse background, like you can go to school and be in tech school or be in basic training with people that are trust fund kids and just wanted to prove to their parents that they could, versus, people that grew up, like in my case, I had a couple of friends that grew up in the inner cities of Detroit and Chicago and would never ever go back to those locations because either most of their family was in gangs or dead because of gang violence. So you do have that. And really what the military provides is, one, education, which is key. And I think breaking a lot of the poverty cycles that we see, but also two, it sets people up financially because you're earning an income. You have to be sober. You're removed from locations that typically would be, where you're from. And for a lot of people that are essentially, in those cycles of poverty, the best way to break that is by uprooting them and putting them in a different situation and environment where they can actually thrive and succeed.
Did you always have the mentality that you feel, has what it takes to be successful, or did you have to cultivate that, or was it even kind of ironed into you by the Army?
I think essentially, I definitely remember prior to joining the military, I was a little bit more soft
Not the Army,
spoken.
sorry, the Air
Yeah, the
Force.
Air
My
Force.
bad.
I think definitely prior to joining the Air Force, I was a little bit more soft spoken. But after I realized what I was capable of, and just I was given structure is really what I needed. I definitely realized at that point that, I was able to attain. And I actually was just talking about this earlier today on a separate podcast. But, there are doers and then there's people that just talk about doing things. And so many people, and we're even seeing this in the political environment, they talk about doing things, right? But they won't actually take that action. And so I realized with the military that if you wanted to get far in the military, you had to take self responsibility and action to complete that mission. And that's something that I now apply to my life. And that's been able to be, I think, a large reason as to why I've been able to propel, especially in politics, which is a rather hard field to get a whole, ahead in, but I've been able to excel and propel. Yeah.
So do you think that, in low income communities and communities that stay low income, that these values of personal responsibility and self responsibility and hard work are not there?
I think that it can be lacking at times depending on the parent experience that the child has within their home. And I think that that largely ties into the welfare state and the position that government has in regards to, creating these cycles of poverty via government dependence. And when you have that cycle of poverty and you have entire generations that just they don't know any better, and or they're taught and they're basically born into that, that's when it becomes hard to break that cycle. And I say that from, someone that was on food stamps.
I mean, describe to me, the mentality that being on welfare can have on a person, or that can consistently being on welfare can have on a person.
Well, for starters, one, if you are getting food stamps or if you are on welfare, you're automatically limiting yourself for income potential. So you're not allowed to make a certain amount. So would you rather lose your benefits and then you're worried about having to feed your kids, but you're locking yourself at that bracket? You then can't also get married. So for women, this is a huge problem, because when you raise a child in a single parent household, it's more likely that that child will have, negative interactions with law enforcement, that they will at some point experience the juvenile detention system. And then also, in addition to that, there's lower rates of graduation. So I do think that it ties more so into the family unit. And that's what you can see if you compare, the Hispanic demographic, the Black demographic, and then the Asian demographic. And you look at what's different in all of those ethnicities and then cultures, you can see, if you look at the numbers of welfare dependents, it's the highest instances of poverty are among Black Americans, followed by Hispanic Americans, and then Asian Americans are even higher than whites in regards to economic success because of the emphasis of family.
Yeah, I think that family definitely plays a role. I mean, there's no question. One thing that the left does not talk about at all, or does not ever really want to talk about, is culture. It's not something that it's kind of an alien vocabulary to them, because of various reasons. One reason is because they don't want to make it seem like one person could potentially have a better set of values than another person. It comes from moral and cultural relativism in some sense. You since you were growing up, in the culture that you did. Low income, largely Hispanic neighborhood, your dad bought corn from a vendor that was probably doing it illegally.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah. and those kinds of things. Do you have any, what are some of, at least, first of all, what are some of the positive thoughts that you have about the cultural system that you grew up in?
Definitely that there was, number one, an emphasis on religion. And I say that because that throughout how I grew up, I mean, with my mom, I was raised Catholic, which is very common for Hispanic Americans. I had my first communion. I remember, just kind of for the listeners, my first communion was hardcore. I looked like I was getting married at like 8 years old. So that was probably why I never had a wedding. But yeah, it was definitely intense. But, the emphasis on religion is something that was instilled in me no matter what at an early age, even from my own father. And although his mother, who was from Mexico City at the time, she had actually gotten really sick very early on in my childhood. But I even remember like things around the house. Like I have this silver, it was like a pill box that she had that had, the Virgin Mary on it, and like the candles that you light in your house for, the rosary and stuff. Like I remember that stuff. That is what really, I think, when I was growing up and like knowing the difference between right and wrong, that's really kind of something that I always remembered was like, okay, 10 commandments, or at some point, even though I might not have been fully walking with God, my faith, what was my faith telling me morally was correct. And so that's what I can say is something that's ingrained and taken very seriously, at least within the Hispanic culture. But also too, there's a lot of, I think, and this is what most people, unless you have family members that are literally like direct descent Mexican, there's a lot of, I think, superstition. And so that's something that I also grew up with. So it's kind of interesting, people still talk about it. And that I think relates back to, when the Spanish came and then they met the Aztecs and the Mayas. That's where that comes from.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's not true. I mean, sorry, that is true. And there's a couple things that I gleaned from that. One, I think sometimes, Hispanic or Latina Catholicism is sometimes denigrated. People say, it's backwards, it's traditional, and those kinds of things. But, I think, having on something that brings community get together to latch onto, to help to, get communion and accountability, from that perspective. And, I'm a person of faith too. So, I mean, I've experienced with that community myself. but to have that the community around you keeping you accountable, I think is a lot better than, being socially untethered and, living a life where you don't have that community around you to keep you accountable. And I think that that's sometimes, a false promise of a liberal society where, you are completely at liberty to kind of do whatever you want.
Yeah, I think that a lot of where the flaws in that is once you're not tethered, then you look for fulfillment in these other things, but you're so misguided and you then try to push your views onto other people because you're still searching to fulfill that emptiness. And we see that a lot through policy. I mean, the fact is that the United States is founded on religious freedom, but that now you're seeing that religious freedom is under attack with all of these policies because they cannot understand that it is okay to respect someone's religious belief, especially on the topic of, what is allowed in churches? What can you force the church to do? And so I feel like right now, especially, I mean, when I do talk to people, because I do try to extend, the olive branch and discuss differentiating ideas, but I don't ever talk about it with people that tend to be liberal from a faith standpoint, because a lot of them aren't faith-based, and so they don't understand. So I talk to them strictly based on science and facts, and that's something that, I went to school for biology, and so I can talk the talk. And so I tend to use that, especially when we're having conversations, even on the topic of pro-life.
Yeah, right. Yeah, especially on the topic of pro-life. And I think that, there's a strong argument there as well. But I mean, you bring up an interesting point because I remember you were talking about superstitions, right? And, people like to think of, okay, we have these superstitions, or, conservatives have certain superstitions, or people from low income areas have superstitions. Well, elites have superstitions too. And I mean, I would say that a lot of elite superstition, stems from the idea that, like, the only thing that's important in my life is, going to an elite college and having, a prestigious life and building up this element and sort of this idol of prestige and sociality. And I think that is a little bit, there's a little bit of worship there, I would say. And then of course this superstitious idea of the woke culture today, as well, as another thing. What's going on with racial identity in our culture today, kind of dividing people in categories of privilege and oppression. It's and kind of worshiping at the feet of oppression.
It's oppression school. Like, how oppressed are you, right? But like, if you have someone like myself, I guess because I'm not a little bit darker skinned, I'm not as oppressed as other people. And I'm thinking that is such a toxic way to view your life, is how oppressed are you? Like, oh my goodness, I couldn't imagine.
Could you imagine, like, if people, I don't know. I mean, we're taught in the school system today that, which they probably are nowadays because of anti-racism, but they're taught, the idea that the color of their skin, means that people are going to denigrate and look down upon you. You won't be able to progress in society, that society will always oppress and exclude you. I mean, what kind of message are you sending to that young person today?
It's terrible. And in fact, I mean, if you actually read the definition of racism from Oxford Dictionary, I mean, it's exactly that. It's thinking that someone is better off or worse than you based on the color of your skin. I mean, that in itself is a racist ideology. And I just know that even for like the young students that I interact with, and like young men and women from like all walks of life, all colors of skin, I never look at those young people and I never tell them, you will be treated because of how you look or the color of your skin. That is the worst thing that you can do, and like speak into someone's life. I tell them, don't even think for a second that you can't achieve something based on what you're born into or based on how you look, because anything that you set your mind to, you can achieve. And I truly believe that.
Yeah, exactly. The American dream. I mean, the belief that your background doesn't have to define you, that you can come from all walks of life, but if you work hard, you can become a full-fledged member of society. And you can not just even do that, but you can even transcend that, and you can become successful.
Exactly. And what I'm finding too is, being in the political arena, when you interact with donors, I mean, a lot of times they will hear my story, And then they start to open up. And, one person that comes into mind in particular, his name's Joseph. And he actually grew up in New Jersey working as like a tech guy in the projects. And he had $2.36 in his pocket when he first started his company. And he's now, over the last 30 years, developed a multi-million-dollar pharmaceutical industry. And, just hearing those stories, it's crazy to me that people that are quote unquote woke would be willing to destroy that person's future because they are not happy with what they have and that they think that they have a God-given right to that person's success and wealth. That is, to me, something that's not okay. It's not American. And it's frankly astonishing.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting, because at that point you're looking at that person and you're saying, oh, he's rich. He's rich. He has wealth. That is an estimation of privilege. But what you fail to look at, you look at the snapshot of what he is today. You fail to look at the 40 or 50 years of work and hard work that he had to get to where he was today.
Exactly.
I mean, it's a very past ignoring philosophy, I would say, what wokeism is.
Exactly. I couldn't agree further.
So just a last question for you. What are your plans up to today? You ran a really great campaign in Florida, and I've been able to follow it for a little while and everything like that. But you unfortunately lost to John Crist. And but do you think that you'll continue to be in the political arena?
Yes, in fact, I think I'm just getting started. I launched the APL PAC. And I am the executive director of that PAC now. And, we have, obviously, as you've seen over the last couple of days, a lot of Americans realize that they've been lied to. And I don't say that with joy. I actually say that kind of as a warning sign, like, hey, everyone should be getting involved. You have people that promise to represent all people in the United States, to include, Democrats. And within the first, couple of weeks, we see the unions being absolutely just lied to. Their job losses are into the tens of thousands. And you see a lot of the stuff that, they're passing is an anti-American first agenda. So, I think everyone should be getting involved. And I think that you're also seeing a big handover that's taking place between the old party politics and the new wave coming in. And so I hope to be a part of that, but I obviously can't announce anything I'm doing anytime soon, but it's definitely, I'm not out of the fight yet. That's for sure.
Okay. That's amazing. Yeah. So what's the PAC called? APL PAC?
Yes, it's the APL PAC, and APL stands for my initials.
Oh yeah. Well, that's amazing, Anna. It's just really great, to see someone with your story coming out of the woodwork and trying to defend the ideals, I think, that really make our nation great and really help to propel, people out of not just situations of financial poverty, but the poverty of mentality. And I think that you've been able to demonstrate that, with the appropriate structure and the appropriate place in life and the appropriate culture, that people can rise out of any circumstances. So I'm really grateful for you.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for doing this podcast. I can't wait to see what some of the reviews are.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for having me on, and I look forward to coming back.
Absolutely. So that was my podcast with Anna Paulina Luna. I learned a lot from her. And one of the things I learned a lot from her was just how transformative the military experience was in her life. Anna was raised in a single parent home. And she was, raised in a low income neighborhood in Southern California. So what was her avenue to succeeding and achieving and eventually becoming a primary candidate to defeat a well-funded Democratic challenger in Florida, the 13th District of Florida? Well, the military experience was crucial for her, and you can tell it with the passion that she talks about it in her voice. I want to bring up a couple of things about the military and what it says about American culture. First of all, Anna asserts that the military is one of the primary creators of social mobility in this country. And I think that is true. What liberals have often been concerned about in America And I think with the justification is the lack of social mobility among members of our current generation. That is, if you're born in the bottom 20%, you're likely to stay in the bottom 20%. And social mobility has actually declined in many measures between now and, say, the 1940s. But you know what also has declined during that time period, during the past 60 years, very notably? That's right. Military service. Military service is so interesting because in 1940, during World War II, about 9% of Americans, so about 18% of the men in America, 18% of the men, so obviously those were men who were of age, men who were, between 19 years old and 45 years old. So maybe it's more like 50% of the eligible men, in America served in the military. And the military became a primary vehicle after the war of actually helping to create social mobility. One, with things like the GI Bill, which offered free tuition to these people. And then two, because the military actually teaches some very valuable skills. I mean, and Anna brushes up on this, very much. It taught her how to work in a team. It taught her how to fly a plane. It taught her how to lead, how to push yourself, how hard work, determination. Those are values that are not necessarily being taught in many communities in the United States, but the military really helps to drill it into you. And that is why, as you see the decline in military service in this country, right now, I think only less than 2% of Americans are actually involved in the armed forces. Which is very, very much down from before. Now, of course, we have reasons for that. One of those reasons, because we don't need, a huge manpower military anymore because we have so much technology to complement our men. So basically, the average productivity of a single soldier is much higher. So we don't need as many people. And then second of all, we eliminated the draft. And there's no major pressing war that we're going to fight in the next 10 years, so to speak, although I might just bite my tongue on that one, considering that a lower percentage of the military, of Americans serve in the military than pretty much ever before at any time in American history. I think that does have an effect. I think that does have an effect on the social mobility of poor and low income people, because of course, military members are disproportionately from poor and low income backgrounds. So when we talk about the lower social mobility in the United States, maybe we should have a conversation about the military's role in improving social mobility, which brings me to this next point about the military. The military, and Anna elaborates on this very well. The military helps to teach a certain set of skills that you are not likely to get in civilian life or in civilian low income life, so to speak, right? Currently, because in the modern age, in contemporary America, Charles Murray writes about this, especially in the rural white communities. There are great disparities in, out of wedlock birth, and in certain cultural values that help to ascertain society, great disparities in community membership. J.D. Vance writes in Hillbilly Elegy about, a book about his rural Ohio upbringing, about a culture of laziness in some respects. I mean, I'm quoting him. He talks about the laziness within his own neighborhoods. And one thing the military definitely does not teach you is laziness. And I think that's why that when when servicemen leave the military, they tend to thrive and do better in their post-military civilian careers. I bring up this 1998 study from Virginia Tech called Marching Upward, the Role of the Military in Social Stratification and Mobility in American Society. Here are a couple assertions. Military service resulted in higher levels of income, earnings, and education for all veterans serving since 1950, with the notable exception of Anglo-Vietnam veterans. In other words, as compared to their civilian counterparts, veterans had significantly higher incomes, earnings, and educational levels post-service. That extends across all races, all classes and all backgrounds except for Anglo men post-Vietnam. That's pretty interesting. I guess Vietnam was a traumatic experience for many people. But for most people, it is a great character building institution, so to speak, and especially, by the way, for Black Americans. Black Americans in this study confirms it, have the same rate of promotion as white Americans in the military. And nowhere else in corporate life, especially big corporate life, are you going to see these kinds of statistics where Black Americans are joining at a higher rate than their percentage of their population, and they're being promoted at an equal rate to whites. You're not likely to find that in the business environment, but you find that in the military environment. And it turns out, interestingly enough, that the military is also another institution that does not practice racial preferences, right? In the military, everybody has to pass a certain standard and a standardized test, an intelligence exam, a physical exam, and a leadership exam. And you have to pass a standardized test, and they're not going to lower the bar for you because you're of a certain race. Contrast this with, say, Harvard University, which lowers the bar for you because you're a certain race, or diversity and inclusion programs in corporate life, which lower the bar for you because you're a certain race. The military does not, and yet Black Americans who join the military thrive, and they disproportionately are attracted to and join in the military. These are very inconvenient claims about meritocracy in the United States, okay? It turns out meritocracy is attractive to minorities, and not just Asians, but to Blacks and Hispanics like Anna Paulina Luna, a low-income Mexican-American who chose the military and benefited from it, and also served her country. This is an issue that a lot of people just do not understand when they talk about race in public life, because they really think that minorities and low-income minorities are in need of so much of their help that they actually need to lower standards for people to come. No, you keep the bar. There's a book that I read called All That We Can Be. It was by a former military expert, and then also I think a sergeant in the military, a Black sergeant, and then a white military expert. They wrote this book called All That We Can Be. And they traced, the military's examination of race, and it was pretty comprehensive. And the conclusions were pretty clear. Black Americans who joined the military did a lot better than Black Americans who stayed in civilian life, given a control situation. You could have a Black American who ascended to the highest positions, a 5-star general, Colin Powell, in the military. And that, in some ways, is representative of the way the military treats Black Americans. We're not going to baby you. We're going to push you. But also, they also had programs where if you didn't meet the bar, but you were, underprivileged, we would give you a program to help you to meet the bar. You would go under an intensive training program to help you meet the bar. Now, we didn't lower the bar for you, but we helped you to meet it. But you still had to do your own work. We still relied on your individual consciousness and determination. Okay? Does this mean that the military does not discriminate? Of course the military discriminates, but the military doesn't discriminate on the basis of race, okay? In order to join the military, you have to be of a certain physical caliber. All right, my friend in high school wanted to join the military, but he wanted to join the Naval Academy, and they liked him, and he passed all of the exams, but literally, guys, he got denied because he was allergic to peanuts. Okay, you have to have a certain physical caliber to join the military. This is not a situation where it's just like, oh, this is like a welfare experiment. Anybody can come in and join. No, you have to have a certain level of genetic blessedness to join the military, so to speak. Now, you could say, oh, that's unfair. Well, too bad. Too bad. Life is unfair, because if you're not of a certain physical capability, then you're not going to be able to keep up with the other servicemen. If you're not able to keep up with the servicemen, then it's going to be very counterproductive to have you. You know why? Because in a military, in a life or death situation, you're only as strong as your weakest man. And that's very clear. When you're in battle, you're relying on each other. You have to support each other physically, mentally, emotionally. And that's all that the military is designed to do. It's designed to test you in all of those ways. The solution to a lot of the problems that we're having in our society today, facing discrimination, facing racism, facing consciousness, you need to instill a culture of strict non-discrimination. But you know what you have to do to instill a culture of strict non-discrimination? You have to make the so-called oppressor race also believe that everybody who is in their circle is of equal qualification as they are. How do you instill a culture of non-discrimination when you are letting in people who are clearly less qualified than you into the situation? Is that how you create a culture of non-discrimination? Is that how you convince people to believe that everybody is made equal in the eyes of God? No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. No, you have to get people to believe and to buy in the fact that people of any race who are coming into this situation are of equal qualification and merit to you. And that's how you get people to believe, and that's how you're able to achieve a culture of non-discrimination. The military does this successfully. Harvard, big tech, corporations, large universities, the government, they don't. They don't. That was my thought on the military. And the other thing I wanted to talk about with Anna, with our conversation on Anna, was the conversation about oppression and victimhood. Okay, so Anna comes in from this low-income Mexican-American background, and in some ways, she could have, at some point in her life, turned directly into this oppression and victim ideology, which, by the way, guys, this is not a new ideology. This has been around for 60 years. It plagued minority communities for 60 years plus, for many, many, many years. And it's just becoming mainstream now. Wokeness is just becoming mainstream, but woke was always a thing, guys. Woke was always a thing. She could have bought into that thing, but she chose not to. You know why? Because of this quote that she said: "That is such a toxic way to view your life by how oppressed you are." It is true. It is toxic. When you talk with a woman like Anna Paulina Luna, a brave, spirited woman who fights in combat, you can tell she has a certain personality. She's pretty energetic. She loves America, and she believes in herself. Oppression theory does not give you the foundations to believe in yourself. Okay, oppression theory gives you the foundations to hate everyone else and to make everyone else miserable, but it does not teach you how to believe in yourself. What did teach Anna how to believe in herself? Well, first, her religious foundation. We talked a lot about church. We talked a lot about the positive aspects of her cultural upbringing. We talked about religion, had a strong cornerstone of her life growing up. When she went to the church, there was a certain discipline that was associated. There were certain rights that she had to take. And doing those kinds of things gave her community. That's another thing that helps to bring people up. When people are in communities that build each other up, usually coming from religion. Okay, the secular people listening to my podcast are like, well, what about atheists? Sorry, atheists. There hasn't been a strong community of atheists. It's not that really grounds public life. You know why? Because what do atheists believe in? Well, they don't believe in God, but they do believe, or at least they act like it, in values that are largely Judeo-Christian, right? That largely come from a Judeo-Christian set of values, right? You come in to America and you order a hot dog, and the guy asks for your money and you give him $5 to pay for your hot dog. What allows you to sit comfortably on that sidewalk as he's preparing this hot dog and him to actually come back and give you a hot dog instead of running away with your $5? Trust. Where does trust come from? Trust comes from the assumption that the other person will do what he is owed to you. That is a culture. Okay, there are many cultures in the world where trust does not exist. Russia today still suffers greatly from a lack of trust. Greatly from a lack of trust. One of my professors, told a story There are no lines in Russia. They're just mobs. People don't know how to wait in line because people just they don't believe in the value of order. They just want to get theirs when they get theirs. There are cultures of trust that were built up in America for a very long time because of Judeo-Christian values that allow us to achieve the work that we're able to do, that allow us to function in modern society and gain the blessings of modern society. And that largely stems from religious communities, from religious foundations, from religious moral training. Anna Paulina Luna got such religious moral training, and she benefited from that. That helped her to escape this culture of victimhood that threatened to plague her because she was a minority. Anna believes in this idea of the American dream. And we talked about this. She said, the American dream is about making it to what you want to achieve. It's about doing what you want to achieve through hard work, without respect to background. This is the foundation of every immigrant, of many immigrants. I don't want to say every immigrant family. Some immigrants really do just take advantage of our system. But some Americans really do believe in the American dream. That is, we come in, we work hard, we expect to be treated not preferentially, but just on the basis of our character and our merit. And through our merit, we can have what it takes to succeed in society. My dad and my dad convinced my mom to come to America. Why did they want to come to America? Why did they want to leave all of their friends and their family, fly 10,000 miles to come to America with no money? Because they believed in a thing called freedom. They believed that they could make it here. They believed that they could make it because they believed fundamentally in a tolerant society, in a free society that allows people to achieve the American dream, that allows my dad to start his own small business, raise a little money and feed his children, unfettered by the government or unfettered by identity politics. What we're seeing right now in our culture today is a reneging upon that promise of the American dream. That is, identity politics is now saying it is appropriate to treat people based on their background rather than their merit. That is a reactionary statement. We are going backwards. We're regressing as a society because of identity politics. Because the American dream is something that took centuries to build, to fully realize. Okay, we had to fight through nasty immigration laws. We had to fight through racism. We had to fight through Chinese exclusion. We had to fight through quotas. And now we have achieved this society where we have a broad-based, very diverse immigrant coalition who comes here and just believes in the right to work from all different cultures, all different faiths. And I think all of us really respect that and want to live in that society. But now you have identity politics come in. And identity politics says, no, we're not going to treat you on the basis of merit. We're going to treat you on the basis of background. Especially if you look a certain way, you will be treated a different way than if you looked a different way. A victimization, identity politics ideology. And what you guys need to know, if you take nothing else away from this conversation, take away this. There are really two choices about how you want to be treated. You can either be treated based on your character, or you can be treated based on your background. Choose one and stick with it. That was my conversation with Anna Paulina Luna. If you liked it and you want to hear more, I hope that you can support me on this Inconvenient Minority Podcast as I talk about these brave new world territories of race, identity, and culture. I really thank you for listening. Please leave a review. I need to have it. And thank you for listening to the Inconvenient Minority Podcast. See you next time.